reporting services is in Paris, France, for the UN climate talks, reporting on selected side events. On Monday, 7th December, the International Institute for Sustainable Development organized an event on fossil fuel subsidies and climate change. This event was held 1 week after the handover of the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform Communiqué to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Christiana Figueres on Monday, 30th November. Tim Grosser, New Zealand's Minister of Trade and Climate Change Issues, set the scene for presentation by panelists.
I feel this is an idea whose moment truly has come. The sum involved, $490 billion US, let's call it 500 billion, is 5 times the amount of money we're trying to get to by 2020 for climate financing. I think that puts it into perspective. And the IEA has estimated that this, fully implemented by 2050, could save up to 10% of global emissions, a little less than the share of global emissions by the United States.
Panelists from Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, and Norway shared national experiences and perspectives on fossil fuel subsidy reforms.
The challenge we face is about figuring out how to replace the 20th century model of fossil fuel-based economic growth, on which is fit to bring growth and prosperity in the 21st century. That means a model based on renewables, based on energy efficiency and low emission levels. If we manage to tax fossil fuel correctly, the decline in emissions could even approach 23% according to the IMF. When you have very low prices on fossil fuel, it's a false market signal. Actually, we should go to the opposite. We should have a CO2 tax or carbon pricing. And you could use all this money towards more investments on energy reforms, for health, for poor people.
Norway was one of the first countries to introduce a carbon tax. This happened in 1990. And of course, there were a lot of concerns related to this, but we saw that it worked. It has spurred investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions.
We have a long tradition of ambitious climate policies, and we have recently set the ambition to be one of the first fossil-free welfare countries in the world. We believe that leading the way in the transition towards a fossil-free society is not only morally right, it is also economically smart.
In Finland, we are investing strongly in clean tech and the bioeconomy. We are also cooperating with our developing country partners in these areas.
Felipe Calderon, former president of Mexico and chair of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, discussed pragmatic solutions to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies while benefiting poor communities.
The IMF study has shown that only 3%, $3 out of every $100 of gasoline subsidies, for instance, reaches the poorest 20% of households. It is the rich families that have the larger houses, the biggest cars, and thus they use most of the energy. Of course, I consider that we can reallocate those subsidies in a better way, for instance, by promoting renewable energy or promoting investment in human capital, education, healthcare.
The best way to help the poorest families is, in my opinion, by conditional cash transfer or direct money transfer. In particular, in Mexico, the program we implemented the Oportunidades, Opportunities program, and the idea was to provide with cash to the mothers and the families.
Fatih Birol, Executive Director of International Energy Agency, further made a case for reforms by comparing carbon prices and fossil fuel subsidies.
Carbon price and the fossil fuel subsidies are exactly two opposite forces. Carbon price is something that you use to discourage the use of fossil fuels, and subsidies for fossil fuels is you use to encourage to use fossil fuels. Most of these subsidies are in the countries where we see a very strong energy demand growth and therefore the emissions. Therefore, it is extremely important to see reforms coming there. But luckily, ladies and gentlemen, today we see in some countries reforms to phase out subsidies. India, Indonesia, Malaysia making strong efforts to phase out the subsidies. This is all very good news.
Scott Vaughan, president of IISD, spoke on IISD's support to fossil fuel subsidy reforms and climate change.
So detailed work again by my talented colleagues at IISD in partnership with OCI and ODI released a report 2 weeks ago on looking at G20 subsidies and identified almost $80 billion to producer subsidies in 19 of 20 G20 countries. The science of climate change is absolutely clear. It's stark that every day that we're delaying the ability for us to land within that below 2 degrees Celsius gets harder and harder.
Stay tuned for more coverage of side events of COP21 from IISD Reporting Services.